The fire team from King Company, 1st Battalion, 1st Marine Regiment, stopped at the cave mouth on September 26, 1944. The way fire teams had been stopping at cave mouths across the Almerbergul ridgeline for 11 days. The opening was roughly 4 feet across, cut into pale coral limestone at an angle that prevented any view of the interior beyond 3 feet. Corporal Holt pressed against the rock face to the left of the entrance. Private Dempsey took the right side. The flamethrower operator, Lance Corporal Webb, stood 6 feet back with the M2-2 unit on his shoulders, 68 pounds of pressurized fuel and ignition equipment, the igniter trigger already open. The operator stepped forward and directed a burst of burning fuel into the entrance. There was a brief billow of secondary flame as oxygen burned in the forward chamber. Nothing moved inside. The sergeant waved Webb toward the opening. The rifle shot that killed him came from a secondary exit cut into the same limestone formation at knee height, covered by a shelf of rock, 16 feet to the right of the main entrance. The fire team had not found it. There was no way to know it was there before the shot was fired. The team pulled back. It was the 4th time in 2 days they had pulled back from a cave with a man down. Across the Almerbergul pocket, other Marine units had pulled back from other cave entrances the same way. By September 26th, the 1st Marine Regiment had tried every approach the terrain and the available weapons allowed. Flamethrowers directed at entrances. Satchel charges pushed to the face of openings. Rifle grenades fired into cave mouths. Direct assault by squad-sized elements up the approach slopes under covering fire. Each technique had killed defenders in exposed forward chambers and in unprotected positions near the surface. None had addressed the fact that most of the Almerbergul's garrison was not in the forward chambers and was not in exposed positions. 11 days into the battle for Peleliu, the 1st Marine Division had not found an answer to what the Japanese had built inside those ridges. Every approach that had been tried had failed, and every failure had cost men. If this story is pulling you in, take a second to hit the like button and subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. It means a great deal to know who's listening. Saipan fell on July 9, 1944. The Japanese garrison on the island, approximately 30,000 men, had been reduced to isolated pockets of resistance before the end of June, but the remnants held on for 9 additional days before the final collapse. Lieutenant General Yoshitsugu Saito and Vice Admiral Triichi Nagumo, the naval officer who had commanded the carrier strike force that attacked Pearl Harbor, both died by their own hand in the last days of the island's defense. The night before the final Japanese counterattack, Saito had ordered a banzai charge involving roughly 4,000 men, many of them armed with bayonets and sharpened bamboo stakes because the island's ammunition supplies had been exhausted. The charge drove through the American lines briefly, killing several hundred soldiers from the 27th Infantry Division before it was destroyed by artillery and massed rifle fire. The charge had not changed anything. Nothing in the record of banzai charges across the previous 2 years had changed anything. The institutional consequence of Saipan's fall extended beyond Tojo's government. Officers who had been arguing in official channels that the beach defense approach was failing structurally found new audiences after Saipan. The evidence in the battle record was precise. Every island in the outer and middle defensive rings had been held primarily at the waterline and on the surface, and every island had fallen within weeks of the American naval gunfire breaking the beach defense. The argument circulating in Japanese military circles was not that Japanese soldiers had fought poorly. It was that the tactical doctrine had placed them in the worst possible position relative to American weapons, and that a different doctrine might change that equation without requiring the larger production numbers or the reinforcement routes that Japan could no longer sustain. The fall of Saipan placed the Mariana Islands in American hands, along with air bases within range of the Japanese home islands for the new B-29 superfortress. The strategic consequences reached Tokyo within weeks. Prime Minister Hideki Tojo's government fell. The Imperial Council convened through the summer of 1944 to assess the revised position. The conclusion that emerged from those sessions was not a plan to reverse the American advance. By mid-1944, that was no longer a credible operational goal. The conclusion was a plan to make the final stages of the American advance so costly in American lives that the United States would negotiate a settlement rather than continue to unconditional surrender and an invasion of the home islands. The question was what tactics could produce that cost. The doctrine that would attempt to answer that question had been developing in the thinking of one specific officer for some time. Lieutenant General Tadamichi Kuribayashi had spent the 1930s in North America, initially as a military attaché assigned to the Japanese embassy in Washington, and afterward traveling through Canada and across the United States assessing American industrial and military capacity. He visited automobile assembly plants in Detroit and steel production facilities in Pennsylvania. He reviewed published production statistics and shipping records. He attended American military exercises as an observer. He also calculated what American factories would produce at full wartime mobilization, using the First World War as a benchmark. American steel output had more than doubled within 2 years of that earlier entry. Automotive assembly lines had converted to armored vehicle production within months. Kuribayashi's private letters home from Washington and Detroit and Pennsylvania described American workers and cities with a respect that was partly genuine and partly the assessment of a professional soldier measuring an adversary's capacity. He had no illusions about what the production gap would mean for any war that lasted longer than Japan's initial strikes could end it. What he saw produced an assessment he communicated through official reports and through private letters that survive in the Japanese military archive. Japan could not win a war of extended attrition against the United States. American manufacturing capacity, once mobilized, would produce weapons and ammunition at a rate that Japan's existing industrial output could not match. The only variable within Japan's control was the price it charged for each piece of territory. Kuribayashi had also studied the accumulated tactical record of the Pacific War through 1944 with the care of an officer who understood that the data in those records contradicted the doctrine his army continued to apply. Every major Japanese defeat from Guadalcanal through the Gilberts and Marshalls and into the Marianas followed a recognizable sequence. American forces landed on a beach under fire. Japanese defenders positioned on the beach or in prepared positions near the waterline fought the landing force to a standstill for hours or days. American naval gunfire, operating from ranges of 2 to 8 miles offshore, then destroyed the beach defenders and the inland reserves attempting to counterattack. Once the perimeter was established, the outcome was no longer seriously in doubt, because the Japanese defensive garrison had no resupply line, no naval cover, and no air support capable of operating against American carrier task forces. Every banzai charge in the record had killed individual Americans and temporarily disrupted American lines, but no banzai charge had reversed a successful landing. They had simply reduced the number of Japanese soldiers available for the next day's fighting. The alternative Kuribayashi proposed abandoned beach defense entirely. The garrison would not contest the landing at the water's edge. It would withdraw inland, into a prepared underground defensive network, forcing the American assault force away from the range at which naval gunfire was most effective and into terrain where the network's geometry gave the defenders a structural advantage. The positions in the network would be sighted so that any attempt to advance on one drew fire from at least 2 others. Lateral tunnels would allow the garrison to reinforce threatened positions and to reoccupy sealed positions from below. Food, water, and ammunition would be stored to sustain the garrison for months without resupply. Individual defenders would hold their positions until killed, not withdraw in good order. Every man dying in place, making the cost of each position as high as the terrain and the tunnel network could make it. Kuribayashi began implementing the doctrine on Iwo Jima in the summer of 1943, but the first significant battlefield test of the same approach came not at Iwo Jima, but at Peleliu, in the Palau Islands, in September of 1944. Colonel Kunio Nakagawa commanded the Peleliu garrison and had received guidance consistent with Kuribayashi's evolving doctrine. He applied it to the terrain available to him on a different island. Peleliu's geological center was the Amurburgul, a compressed mass of coral limestone ridges and ravines approximately 1 mile long and half a mile wide in the island's interior, cut through with natural cave systems that Nakagawa's engineers had spent months expanding and connecting. The count of individual prepared fighting positions within the Amurburgul complex when American forces landed on September 15, 1944 was over 500. Many smaller positions, observation posts, and tunnel connections were not formally recorded and do not appear in surviving Japanese planning documents. The positions were built with engineering care that went beyond the natural advantages of the coral terrain. Major caves had been fitted with sliding steel blast doors that could be closed during American bombardment to protect the garrison inside, and reopened once American troops began advancing, restoring the fighting position within seconds. Embrasures were cut at multiple levels in the same limestone face, so that eliminating one firing port did not silence the position above or below it. Lateral tunnels connected adjacent ridge systems, making it possible for garrison elements to move between positions across the length of the Almerbergul pocket without exposing themselves to American fire. Food, fresh water and cisterns cut into the limestone, and ammunition had been stored in quantities calculated to sustain the garrison for months. Pre-registered fire coordinates covered every approach route from the flat ground south of the ridges to the cave openings on the slopes. The command infrastructure Nakagawa built inside the system was as important as the fighting positions. Telephone lines ran through the tunnel network connecting the principal positions to his command post in a deep cave near the Almerbergul center. Runners could move between positions through the lateral tunnels faster than American observers on the surface could identify and report garrison movements. When an American unit sealed an entrance and moved on to the next position, Nakagawa's network allowed him to direct elements from adjacent tunnel sections to reoccupy the sealed entrance from the inside. The reoccupation was not improvised. It was planned, coordinated through wire or runner, and executed according to the scheme he had prepared during the months before the American landing. The organization of the defense inside the tunnels reflected the same careful attention that had produced the physical positions. The 1st Marine Division landed on Peleliu's white and orange beaches on September 15 after one of the most intensive pre-landing bombardments in the Pacific theater to that point. American aircraft and naval guns delivered ordnance over the island for 3 consecutive days before the assault. Rear Admiral Jesse Oldendorf, commanding the Naval Gunfire Support Group, told reporters that his ships had run out of targets. That assessment was not accurate, but it reflected how the bombardment had appeared from offshore. On the surface, the island had been badly damaged. Vehicles, fortifications in the open, communication lines, and a substantial portion of the Japanese heavy weapons and exposed emplacements had been destroyed. What the bombardment had not penetrated was the coral ridge line. The Almerbergul positions were not affected because they were inside the rock. Colonel Louis Puller commanded the 1st Marine Regiment, the unit assigned to reduce the Almerbergul, while the 5th and 7th Marine Regiments secured the southern tip of the island and the airfield. Puller was 46 years old and carried a combat record that stretched back to guerrilla campaigns in Haiti and Nicaragua in the 1920s and 30s. He had won the Navy Cross 4 times before Peleliu. He was direct, aggressive, and regarded by his regiment with a respect bordering on reverence. The regiment moved into the ridges on September 15th, and the early tactical reports documented a pattern of company-level assault and withdrawal. What became unfamiliar within the first 2 days was the cost. The cave network produced casualty rates per yard of advance that exceeded anything Puller's regiment had encountered in previous Pacific fighting. A company-size element assaulting a single ridge complex might lose 30 or 40 men in a morning without gaining a position it could hold through the following night. The M2-2-man portable flamethrower was the primary weapon assigned to cave reduction across the 1st Marine Division. The unit provided a practical range of 20 to 30 yards under field conditions. A trained operator could direct burning fuel into a cave entrance with consistency at that distance. The Almerbergul cave system had been designed with those range limits in mind. Secondary exits and firing ports had been cut into limestone faces that could only be reached by climbing exposed slopes under direct fire from multiple connected positions. Primary entrances opened into forward chambers that angled away from the tunnel's main axis before the flame from a portable unit could reach the garrison beyond the bend. The burning fuel pooled and burned at the chamber wall without penetrating the tunnel system where defenders were positioned. Marine operators filed post-action notes on the M22's performance throughout the 11 days in the ridges, and those notes accumulated into a consistent technical picture. The flame reached the interior wall of the forward chamber and burned through the available oxygen in the forward space over approximately 8 to 12 seconds of effective discharge. The chamber walls were coral limestone with minimal combustible material. Any defender in the forward chamber during the burn would die, but the garrison had been trained not to occupy forward chambers during attacks. The main tunnel passages, accessible through the angled connection behind the chamber, were outside the flame's reach. When the fuel was exhausted and the forward chamber cleared, the position was intact and the garrison was in the tunnel beyond it. The approach then required the operator to step to the entrance and direct a second discharge deeper into the opening, which exposed him to fire from secondary exits that the initial burst had not suppressed. That was the same condition that had killed the operators before Webb. Demolitions teams worked the cave positions in parallel, attempting to seal entrances with satchel charges and pole charges. The technique accomplished the specific task of collapsing targeted entrances. It failed at the tactical level because of the lateral connection network. A demolitions team would seal an entrance, establish a security position nearby, and return the following morning to find the position reoccupied. Nakagawa's garrison had moved through connecting passages to the sealed entrance and cleared the collapsed rock from the inside. The same caves were reported cleared and subsequently reoccupied 3 and 4 times across the 11 days the 1st Marine spent in the Amerbergul. The effect on the companies doing the clearing was a distinct operational factor, recorded in the battalion journals alongside the tactical information. A fire team that fought its way to an entrance, sealed the opening with charges, posted a security element, and returned the following morning to find the position reoccupied had to process not only the tactical failure but what the failure meant. The garrison was absorbing their attempts without being reduced. Within the regiment's first week in the ridges, that understanding had spread through the company-level units. After-action reports from the company commanders described the cave positions in language notably different from how those same officers wrote about surface fortifications. Surface fortifications, once taken, stayed taken. By September 27th, 11 days into the operation, the 1st Marine Regiment had taken 2,100 casualties from a starting strength of approximately 3,200 men. These figures appear in the division's operational records alongside company-level reports describing each failed approach and each subsequent variation attempted. The regiment was pulled from the ridgeline and replaced by the Army's 81st Infantry Division, which had secured the adjacent island of Angkor and arrived with fresh soldiers, adequate supplies, and the identical tactical problem. Nakagawa's garrison died in the Amerbergul over the following 7 weeks. American forces cleared individual positions throughout October and into November, the casualty rate declining as the pocket contracted but never reaching a figure the operational record describes as controlled. On November 24th, Nakagawa transmitted a final encrypted dispatch to the Japanese 14th Area Army Command reporting that organized resistance by the Peleliu garrison had ended. He died in his command tunnel the same day. Fewer than 200 of the original 11,000 men who defended the island survived. The American cost at Peleliu was approximately 10,900 casualties across all services, including roughly 1,200 killed in action. The operational necessity of the assault was debated at the command level almost immediately after the battle, as the anticipated threat to MacArthur's Letta Gulf landings from Japanese air power based at Peleliu did not materialize. Whether the island needed to be taken at all was a question the casualty figures could not retroactively answer. What those figures could provide was a precise record of what had been tried and what it had cost. The V. Amphibious Corps After-Action Review Board assembled in late October and November of 1944 with access to every regimental and battalion report file during the Peleliu operation. The board's mandate was to extract from the casualty record whatever tactical lessons it contained and translate them into a form that could reach units preparing for the next operations. The work took until January of 1945. The product was a set of tactical notes rather than a published manual, because the schedule for the next amphibious assaults did not permit the time a formal publication would have required. The notes were clear about what had failed and why each failure was structural rather than circumstantial. The flamethrower alone had failed because its range was insufficient to reach the garrison beyond the forward chamber bands in the Amerbergul's prepared positions. Demolitions alone had failed because the lateral tunnel network allowed the garrison to reoccupy any sealed entrance through an adjacent passage. Sequential sealing had failed because closing entrances one at a time gave the garrison time to move through the network ahead of the demolitions teams. Infantry assault without the other elements had failed because Nakagawa had positioned his firing port so that any advance on one position drew fire from connected positions the attacking force had not yet located. The procedure the tactical notes described was built around 4 elements that had to be executed together. Before any approach began, a covering team was to identify and suppress every visible exit from the target position, not the primary entrance. Every exit. The covering team was to be in position with direct sight lines to every identified opening before the flamethrower or demolitions element began the approach. Their purpose was not to destroy the position through sustained fire, but specifically to deny the garrison the ability to engage from secondary exits while the operator advanced on the primary entrance. A flamethrower operator moving toward a cave mouth with an unsuppressed secondary exit at his flank was repeating the condition that had killed operators throughout the Umerbrigul. The covering team solved that specific problem by eliminating the free fire angle from positions the assault element had not yet reached. It was a prerequisite, not a supplementary element. The reconnaissance element that identified those exits was the second component. A dedicated team, working before the assault element moved forward, was to map the complete geometry of the position, including secondary ports at ground level, lateral fissures, and any covered openings within the limestone formation. The third element was the application of the POACUSH-1 flamethrower, a portable unit that had become available in theater in late 1944 and provided a practical flame range of 40 to 50 yards under field conditions, as much as 20 yards beyond the M22's operational limit. That additional range allowed the flame to travel past the angle of a forward chamber's bend and into the main tunnel passage, reaching garrison positions that the older unit had pulled against without penetrating. The fourth element was simultaneous demolitions, every identified exit sealed at the same time, by coordinated teams working from the reconnaissance map. The distinction between simultaneous and sequential closure was the specific tactical insight the entire procedure depended on. At Peleliu, demolitions teams had worked through cave positions in sequence, sealing one entrance, moving to the next, working their way around the connected system over a period of 20 to 60 minutes. By the time a team reached the third or fourth exit, the garrison had already moved back through the tunnel to the first sealed entrance, cleared the debris from the inside, and reoccupied the firing position. Simultaneous closure denied the garrison any viable direction to move. If every exit in the connected system was sealed in the same moment, the network became a closed space with no open outlet. The tactical notes went to regimental and battalion commanders in January and February of 1945. Units rehearsed the four-element procedure on whatever ground was available, including the steel decks of transport ships crossing the Western Pacific. The next objective was known. Kuribayashi's island had been under intensive aerial observation since the summer of 1944. Iwo Jima was 8 square miles of volcanic terrain in the Bonin chain, 760 miles south of Tokyo. 14 months of labor by the island's garrison had produced 11 miles of tunnels at depths between 20 and 100 feet below the volcanic surface, more than 1,500 individual fighting positions connected to the tunnel network, water cisterns, communication centers, and command nodes built into the rock where no naval bombardment could reach them. Kuribayashi had applied the doctrine he had been refining since the Saipan disaster to the full extent that the island's geology and his garrison's months of preparation could support. At the island's southern tip, Mount Suribachi occupied a dormant volcanic cone rising approximately 550 feet above sea level, its walls layered in alternating soft pumice and hard basalt that Kuribayashi's engineers had developed into approximately 1,000 individual fighting positions, connected by the tunnel network into a single integrated defensive system. Major Matsuyoshi Matsuda commanded the garrison defending Suribachi, roughly 2,000 men. The 28th Marine Regiment, 5th Marine Division, under Colonel Harry Liversedge, was assigned to isolate Suribachi from the rest of the island and reduce it. If this is the kind of history you want more of, subscribe and turn on notifications. There's far more in the record still to cover. Your support is what keeps these stories coming. The 28th Marines began their assault on Suribachi's base on February 20, 1945, the morning after D-Day on Iwo Jima. The regiment's assault battalions moved to cut the cone off from the island's main body while engineer teams from the 5th Pioneer Battalion, integrated directly into rifle companies, began applying the four-element procedure to the cave positions on the lower slopes. The difference from Peleliu was visible in the first day's fighting records. Engineer teams did not advance to cave positions until scouts had mapped the visible exits of each target. Covering fire teams suppressed multiple openings before flamethrower operators moved into position. The POACUSH-1 units were staged with room to operate against the rock face rather than crowded into constricted approach lines that had forced operators at Peleliu to advance into fire from positions they had not identified. When demolitions teams moved to seal exits, they moved to seal every identified exit in a position simultaneously, not in sequence. The procedure was not clean in execution. Suribachi's terrain imposed constraints on any attacking force regardless of doctrine. Overlapping fire from positions the reconnaissance teams had not yet located still killed Marines on the approaches. Defenders with tunnel connections to undetected secondary positions could still fire from directions no covering team was watching. The after-action records of the 28th Marines between February 20th and February 23rd document 96 men killed in action and approximately 400 wounded during the four-day assault on the cone. 96 dead and 400 wounded to reduce approximately 1,000 prepared positions defended by roughly 2,000 men over 4 days. At the rate Puller's regiment had taken casualties in the Amerbrugul pocket, against the same scale of garrison, the attacking regiment would not have been operational by the end of the second day. The procedure did not make the cost acceptable. It made the cost proportional to the problem in a way that no previous approach had managed. On February 23rd, a patrol from the 3rd Platoon of Easy Company, 28th Marines, reached the rim of Suribachi's crater and raised an American flag on a section of pipe taken from a Japanese water system. Staff Sergeant Louis Lowry of Leatherneck magazine photographed the first flag raising. A larger flag was brought up later that morning to replace the first, and it was Associated Press photographer Joe Rosenthal's image of the second raising that the American public saw on newspaper front pages across the country. The tactical record of what had been accomplished on Suribachi's slopes in the preceding 4 days was in the battalion war diaries and company reports that were not in the photograph. The procedure now moved north across the island's central plateau, into the ridgelines of Kuribayashi's main defensive complex. The terrain there was volcanic rock rather than coral limestone, and the tunnel system had a characteristic that had not been a factor at Suribachi. At Suribachi, the cave network connected positions within the cone's discrete volcanic structure. Sealing all exits of a given position simultaneously closed that position genuinely, because the network did not extend past the cone's geological boundaries. On the plateau and in the northern ridgelines, Kuribayashi had constructed a continuous tunnel belt running beneath adjacent ridge systems, connecting positions that were geographically separated on the surface but directly linked underground. Passages ran at depths of 30 to 60 feet. A position that appeared isolated on the surface might share a tunnel junction with another position 200 yards away and an elevation change of 40 feet. Sealing all surface exits of the first position was not equivalent to closing the system if the junction below connected to the second position and the second position's exits remained open. American assault units adapted to this condition as the fight moved north, and the after-action reports document the adaptations with care. Sherman M4A3 tanks modified with the E4-5 flamethrower assembly in place of the main gun had been assigned to the Iwo Jima operation in limited numbers. These vehicles, designated the M4A3R3 and referred to as Zippo tanks in Marine correspondence, provided flame projection to a range of 60 to 80 yards and could cross the open volcanic ground of the plateau under fire that would have killed an unarmored flamethrower operator on the approach. The sustained fuel capacity of the tank-mounted unit allowed it to maintain burning heat inside a position long enough to drive garrison elements away from deep tunnel junctions, something a portable operator's limited fuel reserve could not accomplish. 4th Marine Division records from the Northern Plateau fighting between late February and mid-March of 1945 document 17 separate engagements in which the armored flamethrower was committed to a position after infantry portable units had been unable to reduce it. In all 17 cases, the M4A3R3 succeeded where the portable approach had not. The advantage was not only the flame's range and the vehicle's armor. It was the ability to operate across exposed volcanic ground in daylight, sustaining fire long enough to address positions at depths the infantry procedure could not reach. Kuribayashi's garrison died on Iwo Jima in numbers of the island's small geography concentrated with terrible efficiency. 6,821 Marines were killed in action across the operation's 36 days. More than 19,000 were wounded. Of the approximately 21,000 Japanese defenders, fewer than 1,100 survived. Kuribayashi transmitted a final message to Tokyo on March 17, 1945, reporting that the garrison would fight to the last man. Communications from his position in the northern cave complex went silent on March 26. His body was never identified in the tunnel system. He was posthumously promoted to full general by imperial order. Fleet Admiral Chester Nimitz attended the flag ceremony on Iwo Jima's airfield and described what the Marines had accomplished with a phrase that entered the permanent record. Uncommon valor was a common virtue. The operational shorthand that circulated in tactical reporting was more compressed. Blowtorch and corkscrew, flamethrower and demolitions, applied together to the simultaneous closure of a connected tunnel system. The phrase captured 2 of the 4 elements. The covering team and the reconnaissance mapping step that the procedure required before any approach began were the prerequisites the phrase omitted, but the summary was accurate enough to serve its purpose in fleet communications. The 10th Army assembled for the Okinawa operation with a more extensive allocation of Zippo tanks per regiment than had been available at Iwo Jima. Demolition specialists had been distributed to platoon level in several regiments, so that small unit leaders did not have to wait for a specialized team to come forward before beginning cave reduction. The tactical notes from V. Amphibious Corps, revised to include Iwo Jima observations, were in every battalion commander's hands before the operation began. The next problem the procedure would face was not a variation on the Peleliu or Iwo Jima conditions. It was a structural combination of both that had not been encountered before. Okinawa was 466 square miles, an island with real topographic variety, small cities, farmland, elevated ridgelines, and an established civilian population of roughly 300,000. The Japanese garrison numbered approximately 110,000 combat troops under Lieutenant General Mitsuru Ushijima, supported by Okinawan conscripts and naval ground defense forces. Ushijima's chief of staff, Lieutenant General Izumu Cho, was an officer with a reputation within the Japanese army for aggressive thinking. The two commanders had been paired deliberately, Ushijima providing the methodical patience the defensive doctrine required, Cho providing the willingness to exploit any counterattack opportunity the defense might produce. 10th Army, under Lieutenant General Simon Bolivar Buckner Jr., landed on April 1, 1945, on the Hagushi beaches of western Okinawa. The landing encountered almost no resistance. Ushijima had implemented the opening condition of Kuribayashi's doctrine with the same completeness Kuribayashi had planned for Iwo Jima. The beach was given up. The garrison waited in the Shuri line, a defense belt anchored on Shuri Castle in the island center and extending across its narrowest waist. The objective was the same one that had produced Peleliu and Iwo Jima: pull the American assault force inland, away from naval gunfire range, and destroy it on prepared ground where the tunnel network's geometry gave the defender every advantage of position. The Shuri Line fighting consumed American regiments from April through early June at rates the operational records document with consistent precision. The coordinated cave reduction procedure produced results against individual positions along the approaches to Shuri. The Zippo tanks, present in greater numbers than at Iwo Jima, were decisive in several engagements against hardened bunker complexes in the Shuri Castle environs. But in the western sector of the line, assigned to the 6th Marine Division, the procedure encountered a combination of factors that produced the most concentrated attrition of the Okinawa campaign. Loaf Hill was an unremarkable-looking rise in the landscape west of Shuri, approximately 100 yards across and 50 feet high. Aerial photographs showed a prepared defensive position. Ground observers saw a hill of modest dimensions that a regiment with adequate fire support and the coordinated procedure should have been able to reduce within a day or two. Half Moon Hill lay approximately 700 yards to the southeast of Sugarloaf. Horseshoe Hill lay approximately 600 yards to the south. All three positions were connected by tunnel passages running at depths of 20 to 40 feet beneath the valleys between them. Ushijima had placed reinforced garrison elements in all three features specifically to make the three-position complex function as a single defensive system. An assault on Sugarloaf drew flanking fire from Half Moon and Horseshoe, because defenders in those positions had pre-registered fire coordinates covering the ground in front of Sugarloaf. An assault on Half Moon drew fire from Sugarloaf and from Horseshoe. Every combination of single-feature assault produced the same condition. The attacking force took fire from two positions it was not directly assaulting, and the garrison defending the feature under direct attack received reinforcement through the tunnel connection from the other two features whenever pressure became severe. The 22nd Marine Regiment attacked Sugarloaf on May 12, 1945. The 2nd Battalion reached the crest by mid-afternoon following artillery preparation and Zippo tank support. By nightfall, a Japanese counterattack through the tunnel connection from Half Moon had driven the battalion off the crest. The regiment attacked again on May 13 and reached the crest again by early afternoon. A counterattack from Horseshoe, arriving through the tunnel junction after dark, retook the hill. The counterattacks followed a pattern the regiment's after-action notes described with increasing precision as the days continued. Japanese soldiers emerged through the tunnel junction into the lower interior of the Sugarloaf position after dark, when American artillery that had supported the daytime assault was lifted to avoid hitting the Marines holding the crest. The counterattacking force did not fight its way up the exposed slopes under American fire. It arrived below the Marines through passages cut into the rock, and it could reinforce continuously through the night so long as the tunnel from Half Moon remained open. Marines holding the crest after dark were not defending a hilltop against soldiers climbing toward them from below. They were holding a surface position above an active underground approach corridor running directly beneath them, and there was no way to block it from above. The assault repeated twice more in the following days, each time reaching the crest during daylight hours and losing it overnight to counterattacks the tunnel network made possible. The 22nd Marines had taken approximately 1,500 casualties across 4 days. The regiment was replaced by the 29th Marines. The 29th attacked and faced the same structural condition. The hill could be taken in daylight. It could not be held overnight because the garrison's ability to approach through the tunnel junction from Half Moon and Horseshoe made any position on the crest untenable once American supporting fire was reduced by darkness. 11 assault attempts across 2 regiments had cost the 6th Marine Division approximately 2,500 casualties against a complex. The coordinated cave procedure had been applied to correctly and consistently. The after-action diagnosis was specific. The procedure was correctly applied to individual positions, and it worked on individual positions. The condition at Sugarloaf was structural. The 3-feature connection meant that sealing the exits of Sugarloaf left the garrison able to re-enter the sealed feature from below through the passage connecting from Half Moon. Sealing all exits of one position did not close the system when the system included tunnel junctions connecting to adjacent features whose exits remained open. The covering team, the reconnaissance, the POAC, the USH-1, the simultaneous closure, all 4 elements correctly applied to the wrong level of the problem. The solution followed directly from the diagnosis. The simultaneous closure principle the V Amphibious Corps had identified from the Peleliu analysis needed to be applied one organizational level up. Simultaneous assault on all 3 features, with engineers following the lateral passages inside each cleared feature to the junction points connecting them to the others, and demolitions placed to sever the lateral connections between features at those junctions. Not to seal individual exits. To cut the 3-position complex apart at its underground connection points, so that the 3 features lost their ability to reinforce each other through the tunnel system. The assault executed on May 17, 1945, committed elements of 2 Marine regiments and a 3rd simultaneously against all 3 features. The 29th Marines attacked Sugarloaf. Elements of the 22nd Marines attacked Half Moon simultaneously. Elements of the 4th Marines moved against Horseshoe at the same time. Engineer teams accompanied each assault column, and as each feature was cleared, engineers followed the interior passages inward to find the junction points where lateral connections to adjacent features branched off, and placed charges to sever those connections in a coordinated detonation sequence. The junction demolitions work took approximately 48 hours in full, because the passages ran at depths between 20 and 40 feet and the charges had to be positioned at the junction points carefully enough to collapse the connecting tunnel without undermining the stability of cleared surface positions above. The 3 features were secured in sequence as the engineers completed their work. Sugarloaf on May 18th, Half Moon on May 19th, Horseshoe on May 20th and 21st. The positions held. The Japanese did not retake them. The Shuri Line fighting continued south through early June as Iwo Jima's surviving garrison withdrew toward Okinawa's southern tip. American forces followed along multiple axes. The coordinated procedure applied to successive defensive positions in the Shuri complex. On June 18th, Lieutenant General Buckner was killed by a Japanese artillery round at a forward observation post near the Coral Ridge Line south of Shuri. He was the highest-ranking American officer killed by enemy action in the Second World War. General Roy Geiger, commanding the 3rd Amphibious Corps, assumed command of 10th Army and continued the operation south. Iwo Jima and Cho conducted the formal ceremony their military tradition prescribed in the underground headquarters beneath Kean Hill on the night of June 22, 1945. Both men died in the command tunnel. Organized resistance on Okinawa ended the following morning, June 23. The 10th Army's final casualty count was 12,281 killed in action and more than 38,000 wounded. Japanese military dead were recorded at approximately 110,000. The civilian population of the island had been caught between the 2 armies across 82 days of fighting on terrain where every ridgeline had been prepared for defense and every valley had been registered for fire. The casualty figures from Peleliu, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa entered the planning documents for Operation Downfall, the projected Allied invasion of the Japanese home islands, as the primary operational baseline. Aerial reconnaissance of Kyushu in the summer of 1945 showed excavation work underway at a scale that dwarfed anything the Pacific Island campaigns had produced. 60 or more Japanese army divisions had been assigned to Kyushu's defense. Kuribayashi's doctrine had been distributed to every regional army command in Japan. The cave and tunnel network the reconnaissance photographed from altitude was being prepared at depth and breadth that made Iwo Jima's system appear preliminary by comparison. American planning staffs incorporated the coordinated cave reduction procedure into their downfall casualty projections, and then produced estimated killed and wounded figures in the range of 250,000 to 1 million American casualties in the first 90 days of the Kyushu landings alone. The procedure would be applied. The doctrine it would be applied against had had more preparation time than at any previous site, and a vastly larger garrison operating on terrain 60 times the area of Okinawa. The projections reflected the intersection of those two facts with what the Pacific Campaign record showed about what the procedure actually cost, island by island, in precise figures. The atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima on August 6, 1945. Nagasaki was struck on August 9. The decision was made by men who had the Pacific Marine Corps 3-year casualty record available when they made it. The figures from the Amerbergor ridgelines, from Kuribayashi's volcanic tunnel network, from Sugarloaf's lateral junction demolitions, those figures constituted the operational baseline against which the downfall projections were constructed and against which the alternative instrument was evaluated. The cave reduction doctrine did not stop with Japan's surrender. When Chinese and North Korean forces used the same underground defensive principles in the Iron Triangle sector and the Punchbowl area during the Korean War, American Marine and Army units applied procedures derived directly from the Pacific Tactical Notes. The ridgeline terrain of the Iron Triangle, heavily weathered limestone with natural cave systems similar in character to the Amerbergor's coral, produced conditions close enough to the Pacific experience that the procedure transferred without fundamental revision. Units that had fought in the Pacific and were still in service brought first-hand knowledge of the application. And the Pacific Tactical Notes have been retained in Marine Corps institutional documentation rather than archived as an artifact of a specific theater. The same four-element logic, reconnaissance before approach, covering fire on all identified exits, appropriate flame projection to depth, simultaneous closure. The tunnel network's advantage over standard infantry assault diminished in Korea for the same reason it had diminished at Peleliu and Iwo Jima and Okinawa. The procedure had been designed to address the network rather than the individual entrance. The physical traces of the Pacific Cave Campaign can still be found on the islands where it was fought. On Peleliu, the Amerbergor ridgelines have been largely reclaimed by tropical vegetation in the 8 decades since the battle. But cave entrances sealed by demolitions in 1944 are present beneath the growth at trail edges and in the coral faces above the approach routes. The steel blast ore frames documented in Japanese position records have corroded but not entirely disappeared. The island receives limited visitors each year, most of them Japanese and American families of men who died there and military historians who come to walk the terrain the after-action reports described. Iwo Jima has been returned to Japanese sovereignty under its original name, Iwo II. The island is restricted from ordinary civilian access, but the Japanese government has preserved sections of Kuribayashi's tunnel system for access by families of the garrison and invited commemorative groups. Volcanic activity has shifted portions of the surface since 1945, but the ridgelines in the northern plateau that cost the 4th Marine Division its heaviest fighting retain the geometry of Kuribayashi's excavations. Tunnel entrances sealed by Zippo tanks and demolitions teams in March of 1945 remain in the island's rock. On Okinawa, the underground headquarters complex beneath Tamagusaku Hill in the island's south, where Ushijima's command staff worked through the final weeks of the battle, has been partially preserved as a publicly accessible historical site. More than 300 meters of headquarters passage are open to visitors. The ventilation shafts, communications alcoves, and medical areas cut into the coral are intact in the preserved sections. Standing in those passages, it is possible to understand both what Ushijima built and what the Marines working on the surface above it were trying to do. Colonel Nakagawa was buried at the Peleliu Military Cemetery and posthumously promoted to Lieutenant General after the island was fully secured. Kuribayashi's body was never identified in the northern Iwo Jima cave complex and remains officially unaccounted for, though his posthumous promotion to full general is recorded in the Japanese military register. The National Memorial Cemetery of the Pacific in Honolulu holds American servicemen from across the Pacific Theater. The Marine Corps War Memorial at Arlington, dedicated in November of 1954, lists the 6,821 men killed on Iwo Jima. The names at Peleliu and Okinawa are held in the same archive. The doctrine that addressed what Nakagawa and Kuribayashi and Ushi Jima built was assembled without a single author. It came from the after-action reports of sergeants and demolition specialists and company commanders who had tried approaches that failed, recorded what had failed, and sent those records up the chain to the officers at the Amphibious Corps who synthesized the accounts into a procedure. It was rehearsed on transport decks by men crossing the Pacific toward islands they had been told would cost them. It was applied in volcanic rock and coral and limestone over 3 years of increasingly complete execution, against a doctrine whose creators understood exactly what the Americans would bring and had designed the tunnel systems to defeat it. The tunnel networks accomplished what they were designed to accomplish. They made the price of taking Japanese-defended ground catastrophic by any calculation the American command had used in the campaigns before them. 1,200 Americans at Peleliu, nearly 7,000 at Iwo Jima, more than 12,000 at Okinawa. The doctrine worked. It produced costs of the planning documents for the home island invasion carried forward and multiplied against a garrison 40 times larger on ground 40 times more extensive. The procedure assembled from those casualties worked too. It reduced positions that individual valor and conventional weapons had failed to reduce. It was built from the reports of men who had survived what failed and written down what they had seen, and from the analysis of officers who turned those reports into a method. The method was applied against the most extensive tunnel network the Pacific War produced, and it prevailed, at cost that the casualty records hold with the same precision they hold everything else. Both things are true, and the archive holds both. The tunnels did not stop the Marines from taking every island. Nakagawa's garrison held the Amerburgul for 63 days in a pocket the size of a few city blocks. Kuribayashi's garrison held Iwo Jima for 36 days against 70,000 Marines. Ushi Jima's garrison held the Shuri line for nearly 3 months before the withdrawal south. In each case the outcome was the same. The tunnel doctrine did not reverse the result, but it extended the fight on terms that produced a casualty record of great precision, and that record traveled from the Pacific Islands into the planning documents for Operation Downfall as the most reliable data available about what the invasion of Japan would require. The ledger the Pacific Cave Campaign built, cave position by cave position, assault by assault, each entry a name and a unit and a date, became the most precise operational baseline available to the men who chose a different instrument for ending the war. Thank you for staying with this until the end. If what you heard here stayed with you, the other films on your screen carry the story forward. Subscribe if you haven't, and I'll see you in the next one.